They want to have vision cast for them, because sometimes they're not good at that. Sometimes they are. But when it comes to the church, they're not. So they need help casting a Jesus-focused vision. And as leaders, that's what we do, is we identify them. We, through a GSE, we call it macro training, which is what we do with the established churches. Learn how to identify them and, help them catch a vision, help them see a vision, and then release them. Now, where this gets hard is when gatherers work. In a church plant, you expect it, you need it. In established church, we typically hate it with a passion. It's why we have controlling systems. Chaos breaks out. Established churches, we don't like chaos. So I've pastored for 24 years. At the time, I didn't like chaos. Now I love chaos. I have a successful day when I know chaos broke out somewhere in our network. But that's where the rub and the difficulty of this becomes, because gatherers, when they're effective and they're fruitful and they do what we want them to do, they've created chaos because people are coming to Christ. People are new believers, and they need diapers changed, spiritual diapers changed, and they need to be discipled, and they've got all kinds of mess in their world that needs help. This takes time. It's going to cost some people to life on life be with them, because whenever chaos breaks out, that's what we have to go and minister and be with and disciple them through and into. But we've built so many systems to fight chaos. Are you familiar with the words sodalic and modalic? Have you heard those? They're missionary words. A modalic, both are good. Both are good. There's no bad here. Modalic people like to build health. Sodalic people like to go where we've never been. When people go where we've never been, chaos breaks out. So gatherers are sodalic. Most of the rest of the church in America is modalic, because they like to build systems that make things healthy and smooth, and praise God, they need to. We have to have them do it. But what's common in America, in the American church, is we have all kinds of modalic people, but no sodalic people, because we've driven them off. You can't get a gatherer to sit in a meeting beyond maybe one time. It is not why they're here. We're modalic people, hey, we need about 5 more of these meetings, because it makes them feel good and brings clarity. And again, it's all good. We just have to understand we need both. And so we have to be able to see how we're doing church and seeing how we can release gatherers, identify them, raise them up, and put them to work in the harvest among lost people and de-churched people, because they're very effective and it works really, really well. Anything I can clarify there? Because I'm going to move into some storytelling to try and illustrate some of this, but anything I can clarify on what the structure of a cohort looks like, a GSE cohort? Does it make sense? At least make sense enough? Yes, sir. Ask again, please.
So you said 30% of the church. 30% of your church should be gathering, and that's the goal. And I think I know in general what you mean by gathering, but is that like inviting to church? Is it sharing the gospel? You know who those people are? What I guess what is the definition?
Yeah, what is it? So that 30% marker we're working towards is, we identify gatherers. We have someone we think, and we've talked to them, and they say, yeah, I think you might be right. I'm willing to do this. And then we find out who they are working to gather. That's what the marker is. If they do any of the other things you mentioned, that is just cherry on top. We want to get there, but what we're initially measuring is we want gatherers active in the field. That's what we want to measure first. And so we have to find out who they are, and we got to hear from them who they're targeting and what steps they're taking. Mike's coming.
When you say gatherers don't like meeting, what do you mean by that? Like they don't want to sit down
Yeah, they don't
in
want
a
to sit in the
board
meeting.
meeting to discuss plans, but they do like to gather to worship. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, gatherers don't like to hang out in meetings. Sodalic people don't like to sit in meetings. They've got to be in the field. That's just how God's made them. And a meeting room is not the field. Unless we're starting to fill our meeting rooms with lost people, it's not the field. They just want to be where there's people they want to reach. So they just don't like it because they're just not made that way, and it's okay. And so as pastors and leaders, you've got to understand this and realize, how do we work with that? How do we, kind of nudge through this, because we're not slapping people around saying you're wrong. This is how God's made people. And how do I embrace it? How do I understand it? And how do I work with it so that it becomes effective in our church family, what we're doing? Because again, we're not talking about replacing anything you're already doing in the harvest. This is another tool for the toolbox. So you keep doing what you're doing. And the other thing I need to mention, I'm glad you're asking these questions, is in a GSE cohort, every congregation applies GSE differently. It's not everybody's doing the same thing. Each church, led by the Spirit of God, uses their gatherers towards whatever it is the Spirit leads. And so if there are 5 congregations in the cohort, there are 5 different applications of GSE. So it's one of the very powerful things of this. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not everybody's got to do the same thing. The only thing we're doing that's the same is that we're putting gatherers to work. But everybody can apply it differently based on what God's doing where you're at. Yes, sir.
So would you say that as the congregation reaches the 30% and beyond, knowing that traditionally we have forced out the sodalic people and focus on the modalic people, that part of the cultural shift is the congregation becomes more sodalic?
Yes.
And so there's probably additional shifts then in how we function with more people who are not interested in committees.
Yes.
Is there also a generational reality with that? Or is that strictly more of a personality reality?
It's typically not generationally driven. Another thing that surprises us, there's a lot of gray hairs who are gathering massively. It's not a 20, 30-something thing only. It's something that because gatherers are gatherers because God made them in this creative genius that way. That's why there are gatherers in every culture. This thing works any place in the world because God made gatherers in every culture. And in the local church, it's as we identify them and help them understand who they are and release them, they'll be all ages. Now, there'll be a lot of gray hairs saying, I can't do that. Well, there may be some things they can't do, but it's typically not what they think. Because everybody hangs out with people, everybody talks to people, everybody goes out to eat, everybody, that's another piece of gathering is, that I should have mentioned when I was sharing at one. Gathering is something we train people to do as they go through life. So we're not adding to anybody's schedule. You don't gather Tuesdays from 7 to 9 and then take the rest of the week off. It's as you go through life, and gatherers are just masters of this, they tend to go to the same gas station or they go to the same grocery store or they get in the same line with the person or the teller at the bank. They'll wait because they've got something going. And they'll do that in life. And so we're not adding to people's plates, we're just helping them see, just if they're not already doing it, helping them see life differently, different opportunities, because we're praying. And because we're praying, God keeps doing what God does. And we let our gatherers connect with it and bring them in to what's happening. I want to share some stories. Or is there anything else I could try and clarify? These are all great. You guys are doing wonderful. So this one cohort I mentioned in northern Indiana, there's a church called Jefferson Community Church. Ken Hunn is the pastor. I've known Ken for a lot of years. Ken has drunk the Kool-Aid. He's about a year older than I, maybe 2 years older than I. So he's mid-60s, so that tells you how old I am. He is transitioning. He's the lead pastor of the church. He's moving to half-time to open up a full-time position to hire a full-time gather. His church has this kids program. It's after school, during school, and it's a summer program. And there are 200 families from the community who have their kids involved in that. None of them, up until January, were coming to the church. And this is 5 years or more this program's been running, and these kids and these parents love it because the lady that runs it is amazing. In January, God brought the first family over, and Ken says, just because God said, you're going the right direction. So I've been praying for 5 years that somebody would hire an intentional gather as a staff person. And Ken's the first one. I almost had a guy in Florida, but he backed away. But Ken's committed. Ken's doing it. They're advertising. They're looking. Kat and I are scouring our network because we had some amazing ones, but they just weren't ready to move. But we're excited for that because the job description for this gather is to primarily focus on those 200 families and start churches with them. Because Ken understands there's a reason why God's not let them walk across from where they do the kids stuff into where the auditorium is. Ken understands that God is doing something by not letting that happen. What is it? His conclusion is, I think God wants us to start a bunch of churches with these families. Because he thinks God's telling him, these families may not really connect with what we're doing on Sunday morning. So let's start something that's a fresh expression. Use GSE to start as many as they possibly can. I love it. He is one of my heroes because he's taken a risk that we've not had anybody take. I mean, it's really cool. Now, you don't have to do that, but that's what they're doing. And so last time I spoke with them 2 weeks ago, there's someone locally that they've run across that may be the person. May be the person. They just have to keep talking to them and asking them questions. So that's really cool. But each of the churches in that cohort all share, because when we meet in person, there's always a so what's going on section. Every time we end the day, we coach next steps. So between now and next time we meet in 3 months or so, your team has clear next steps. Here's what we're going to do over the next 3 months. So when we get back together and when we have the all-team calls, we're processing that stuff. So that if there's a barrier, we figure out how to get around the barrier. If it's celebration, we celebrate. We just do whatever it is God is stirring. And it's working. And it's working better as a cohort because there's so much more prayer interaction. They're doing things together. They do stuff together. They did this event where they brought in, they've got a lot of horse riders. And so they have these Cowboys for Christ. Have you ever heard of Cowboys for Christ? There's a big movement of them in the area. And one of the churches runs a Cowboys for Christ. And they brought in the main leader of that for like a 4-day thing, and all the churches came together in this cohort, and it was massively successful in terms of getting the gospel to people and whatnot. So anyway, that stuff was pretty amazing. There's a church in York, Pennsylvania. Any Pennsylvanians? All right. You've won so far. in York, PA. Dustin's the pastor. Dustin, is Dustin mid-40s, dear? Probably. He's been, it's now called Thrive Church. He's been there probably almost 10 years. When I was pastoring, Dustin and I were in the same small group because our denomination had regional small groups. And so Dustin knew very well GSE stuff. He even did some stuff. We did a lot of GSE work in low-income apartment complexes, and he took one of those for us and started some stuff. So when he got the call to go to York, he said, Tony, within the first 6 months, I'm going to have you come out and share GSE, and we're going to build from there. And that's what we did. And it's gone very well. He's used GSE to basically revamp the church because the previous pastor had been there 30 years. So it's, one of those fairly hard transitions after having a leader there for 30 years. But Dustin's done it very well. And he uses gatherers in the most amazing and wonderful way. Back in May, we launched with a church in North Manchester, Indiana. And this one, it's just a single church. We couldn't find others to cohort with, so we're doing the cohort idea with just a single church. Kurt's the pastor's name. And going in the first in-person training and meeting as in the all-team meeting, I was asking them, so where do you want to focus? Do you want to focus on church planting, or you want to focus on what you want to do in your own congregation? Overwhelmingly, let's focus on our own congregation. Great. So I set the training day up that way. Because usually in the first day I'll do both a plant training and a established church training, so they can have both. So I pulled the plant training out because I didn't want to confuse people. So that meant we got done a little bit early. So with about 45 minutes to go, I said, where else do you want to go? Kurt raises his hand. He says, can we talk church planting? Okay. We can talk church planting. And he says, well, I got a family moving to Fort Wayne, got a family moving to Indianapolis. Can we plant with them? Of course we can plant with them. So we processed that for a little while. One of the ladies in the room, there were 15, 18 people in the room, said, why would we want to start a church? And I thought for a moment, trying to decide which way to answer. And I said, primarily because we want to spread your DNA. You're a healthy church. We want to see more churches like you. And she was okay with that. And then as we were talking about it, I made an off-the-hand comment. I said, I think North Manchester has 5,000 or 6,000 people. That's the size of the town. I said, you could plant 10 churches here and not run into each other. And the lady said, we have too many churches already. And I said, you may have too many church buildings. You don't have too many churches. Finished the day. 2 weeks later, had the all-team meeting to debrief and set up the next training, which is for us this next weekend. I get a text from one of the pastors who says, we want as our focus in our meeting tomorrow to be, what would it be like for North Manchester to adopt our church? I said, that is a great focus. Get in the call, and after doing the catch-up and the debrief, go through. So, talk to me. What do you want to process about North Manchester Donner Church? I thought they were going to talk about Fort Wayne or Indy. They didn't. They surprised me. It was wonderful. They said, we have this small group. A guy named Dylan leads it. And there are like 4 families in it. 2 of the families do not come on Sunday at all. But they come to this small group. We think we should start a church with it. What do you think? And I'm working so hard to stay in coach mode because I'm about to explode. And I say, so what would it look like? And we coached through a little bit. And I finally said, so what are some of the reasons why you're thinking this way? And then they told me, well, it's been a long time that these 2 families have come to this small group and haven't come to anything on Sunday. What's God telling us? Should we realize discipleship is best done in the context of the church? And they're not getting everything church is just by the way they do small groups. So we're thinking God may want us to do something. And that's when I lost and I said, boy, you guys are my heroes. I think you're spot on. Let's pray about this. Let's walk this way. Let's see what God might be leading us to do. And so today's Saturday, right? So Monday, I'm on a call with them. I can't wait to hear what they tell me to help set up when we go there Saturday as to what they're going to do. Because then they told me what drove them was that off-the-cuff comment I made about starting 10 churches and you wouldn't run into each other. They've been processing that. And it made sense to them. It made sense to them. And so we'll see what God does. But that's some of the stuff that's happening. We have a GSE cohort in Maryland with a denomination. This one surprised us. It started with 4 churches, and they're already just finishing the first year, starting 2 churches and maybe a third one. That wasn't the design or focus or purpose, but that's what's happening. That's what God has led them to do, is they're starting at least 2 and maybe a third one, probably by the end of the year. And so as that rhythm happens and as congregation and little leaders come together and we intentionally, and this is the key word, intentionally talk and pray towards God, how can we reach deeper into the harvest? How can we take these people that you've shown us in Scripture are gatherers? How can we put them into the harvest, into our communities, to see what it is you have for us? And knowing that the call's coming, knowing that the next in-person day is coming and I'm going to be asking questions or my co-coach will be asking questions. They pick the ball up and they run with it. Where, if not for the structure, who knows what would happen. So we find a lot of fruit coming in areas that we really weren't expecting or looking to see. One last story before I open up for other questions. Last week we were in Grand Rapids with the Brethren Church Conference. And they're the group I mentioned, we've been partnering since 2008. And last year was the first year we did it. I've been after him for a few years, but last year in Boise, I finally got him to, let's do a prayer walk. We prayer walk a lot of stuff. When we don't know what to do and we want to start something somewhere, we go prayer walk it. And the way we prayer walk is we go there, wherever it is, and we say, God, who you want me to talk to? First person I see, I take as the answer. And I go up and try and start a conversation with them. And we'll say, God, help me meet some gatherers. Help me meet some shepherds. We want to start a church here. Who do you want me to talk to? And again, whoever we see, we take that as God's answer and try and start a conversation with them. So in Boise, there were 4 of us. There was like 20 people telling me they're going to come. There were 4 of us that went out on a afternoon of 103 degrees. We didn't think this through very well, which meant no one was out. But we did the prayer walk. This year, they put it in the schedule. So Wednesday at 4 p.m., I'd raised up some other leaders through coaching calls with them, and there were, I think, 7 of us who were going to, we didn't know how many, if anybody was going to join us, but the whole conference knew. And they had 150 people there. And so we finished the session, meet under the sign. If you want a prayer walk, we went out under the sign, and we ended up having 3 teams go out. 18 of us went out. And I had arranged it we went to parks because I knew we'd have parking and we could walk through the park, and then walk into neighborhoods. And we had been led by someone who had lived there, that we were in the most unchurched part of Grand Rapids, which is why we went there. So we went, and again, a learning lesson. By the time we got there, we started at 4:30. We were going to prayer walk till 5:30, 5:45, and go have supper together and debrief. Well, there wasn't many people out because it was supper time, evening meal time. As we were going back to the car, people were flooding into the park. Another learning curve, learning point. We went to the restaurant. 15 of us made it to the restaurant, and we were going around the table debriefing. Everybody shared their experience. A lot of good conversations. We had a card to give to them, so we're still holding out that someone responded to the card, but none of us had a conversation that, because we want to start a church there, and God didn't give that to us yet. But while we're sitting at the table, we're done debriefing. Someone mentions that the Brethren Conference next year is in Lancaster, PA. And this guy named Brad, a pastor, was like 4 chairs away from me. And I said, Brad, how far is Lancaster from you? He said, oh, it's less than an hour. And I looked at him and said, should we? He says, what, start a church there? I said, yeah, let's do that. So this thing has blown up. Our plan is to start a church in Lancaster before their general conference goes, so the conference can prayer walk for this new church. And so a plan is made to go, and I'll spare you the details. But to me, that is the outcome of that prayer walk, is 2024. And I'm pretty pumped about that. And look forward to seeing what God may do, because Brad got a couple guys lit up about it, and one of those guys actually works for us. And so he reached out to me and told me, Tony, here's what I think we should do. Yeah, let's do that. So, what questions do you have about what a GSE cohort would look like? What can I try and make more clear? I definitely don't want to be late today because food is waiting. It's okay to go long when there's no food. Anything at all? Yes, sir.
I'm not quite sure how to ask this, but I like your analogy about changing spiritual diapers and the mess and all the work that goes along with it. I'll just be blunt.
Please.
I've got a church of absolutely wonderful people. They love the Lord. They like the idea of reaching out to the
Yes.
community.
Yes.
But I don't think we have a lot of people who want to get their hands dirty with the aftermath.
Yes.
I don't know where to go with that, and I'm not even sure what to ask. But
I hear you well.
Could you respond to it?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. You, of course, are the only person with which that's true. What we believe in y'all heard of a tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell's concept. It was long before him, but he made it famous. Depending on who you read, a tipping point is 13 to 19%, which means I never need everybody, ever. Matter of fact, I don't want everybody. They're a total distraction. We do this, the coalition of the willing. So what we recommend in your environment is there 1 or 2 people, maybe 3, no more, with whom you could share a vision and say, if God, approves your heart for this, we have a tool we can use. Would you go on the journey with me? Cost you a year. See what they say. That's what I recommend people do. And then, sometimes it's not there. Other times I've had it took a couple years, but they took the step. We don't know the timing, but that's what I recommend is we can get to a tipping point to get the whole congregation, but I only need to start with a couple people. That's really all we need. And we're not having you keep secrets or anything. This is, hey, I asked you. You said no, or you said, eh. So, yeah, that's what I'd recommend. Yes, Davey.
So when you start a church, how many people, when they are gathers, if they are trying to find people, are they all trying to find new people? And how many people from that original church are coming to that church? And or are they only staying there for a period of time till it gets on its feet and then it goes back? Because a lot of times I think I see churches that plant, but then they just bring people from other churches to
Yeah, they
that.
just
and
reshuffle
it ends
the
up
deck.
being, right, it's reshuffling the deck, and
Yeah.
it's not so much, you might have one newbie and you just keep church jumping. So like how does your church work in that aspect, and how do you avoid something like that happening?
Yeah, so Tammy's asking, when we do start a church, how do we keep it from just shuffling the Christian deck? The first thing is our gatherers gather in the unchurched, dechurched world. The blunt side of it is when I'm tied to it, I don't want anybody from the church that I'm a part of there. I don't want any of them there. They had their chance. You know, they could have done this. I don't want you there. And I don't want you there because you're bringing baggage I don't want in this new church. And so that's me eldering. That's me being in an elder role, and I'm making the decision, well, we're going to, it's going to be a daughter church, but this church is going to reach people that the mom church has never been able to reach. They've never walked through the door. And it's okay, because there are people walking through the door, but it's not these folks. So I don't want those folks coming here. And that's my job. Me and the pastor agree on that. It's just how God does his church. ECC is what our Sunday morning, ECC reaches people. They're not reaching the folks on this side of the tracks. It's okay. So there's sometimes some blunt, hard stuff, because if it happens, what we want's not going to happen. Yes, sir.
What happens when you're partway through this process and the control kicks in and begins to snuff it out?
It's a great question. We try and recognize it as early as we can so that we can kill it. Because everybody that goes to this point in things, we've put through a GSE training where we've trained this idea so that if it gets mentioned, it's not new. So the key leaders know the GSE ideas, the principles, so they know if me or someone says, okay, stop it. They know what I'm talking about. Or when another leader says, well, help me. Okay. Because through the training pieces, we train what the damage that can do. And so the word intentional, mentioned a few times, intentionality is a huge piece of this. Seeing what's there, being intentional to say, that we can't have. This we can have. So that's what we do.
So then by having leadership more than just the church itself helps keep that from happening.
Yes. I've not mentioned the regional leader this hour, I don't think, have I? I mentioned them last hour. Did I mention the regional leader? The regional leader is key in this. The regional leader is someone experienced in GSE who's watching this, coaching this, being a part of this, someone with experience so that we can, nip it in the bud as quick as we can. Great questions. We have maybe 4 more minutes. Yes, Dan.
Is that on? Sorry. This is my last question, I promise. What is your, do you have when a church has already been established but they don't necessarily have a discipleship set in place, do you have a program of some sorts that you would share or even have online information on how to implement that or apply that?
Yeah, we train the shepherd the same way in this approach as with what we do in a plant, where we have, we call it a multi-voice question engagement for group conversation and disciple making in that context. So we start there and then implement other pieces. And like I said, the last hour, the discipling process is all yours. We don't tell you how to disciple. You have that. So, and we depend upon you to have that, because we don't want to go there, because you've got it. Like I said, I do my homework. I love you guys. You're doing good work. You're doing very good work. Yes, sir.
So I'm just trying to think through the implications with the established church, and if you're sending out the gatherer and not sending the established church with them, and they keep planting new churches, you're needing to continue to find new gatherers in your established church in order to keep the process going.
If you choose to do it in a planting way, yes.
Okay.
Another option you have as a pastor is to not plant, but to start things within your congregation. You know, revitalization can come both from planting as well as implementing your gatherers into the harvest, however God leads in your context.
So for instance, if we were looking to expand our youth ministry in the area,
Yes.
we'd be looking for youth gatherers
Yes.
to
Yes.
bring the youth in
Yes.
to our shepherds and
Yes.
develop elders within that group.
Exactly. If you want to expand your small group ministry, we have a GSE small group training where we walk through how do you put a gatherer and shepherd together to start your small groups. So the gatherer, brings people into the small group ministry. Yes, sir.
So I had a question from what you had mentioned earlier about how you really like chaos. And
Yeah.
so I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that a little bit more. And I guess, is that more of like bringing the gospel to unchurched people and what that entails, or if you could just go into more of what you meant by like
Sure.
chaos?
So I love chaos, and chaos translates into anytime there's a new church plant, it's pure chaos. That's just the way it is, from the book of Acts till today. In the established church world, chaos is, so North Manchester, I mentioned, had gatherers in their youth ministry. The gatherers were gathering people that really needed Jesus, but the police kept showing up at their church when the youth were meeting because the police needed to be there. Because the gatherer was gathering people who were bringing drugs. And obviously that can be problematic. And so police came, and police needed to come. This all happened before they knew GSE, so that pretty much shut down their youth ministry, is what happened. They weren't able to overcome it. They now wish they knew what they knew about GSE, so they could have worked with the gatherer, because they didn't work with the gatherer. They just found someone who was a people magnet and said, go bring kids. And that kid brought kids. And they brought stuff in their pockets too. That's chaotic. That's chaotic. Small group starts, and you get people in the small group that really need Jesus. Their marriages are a mess. Well, somebody's got to work with that. If you've done that, and I know you have, that's a little chaotic. It's draining. It's hard work. But it's the chaotic fruit of what it is to work in the harvest. And to get people from where we meet them, away from Jesus, into a process of becoming closer to Jesus, getting saved, and becoming a faithful, mature follower of Jesus who reproduces themselves and other people, because that's the goal. That's what we disciple towards. And so that's some of the chaotic. And I also love when I'm coaching someone and they get on the call and they're just freaking out because it worked. It's worked. And sometimes they don't know what to do. And that's why we have coaching calls. We process what to do. And they do it, and it works. So we have 1 minute, so I'll turn it over to you. Because if you get out of here tonight, we have to head home tomorrow because of stuff of Monday. So it means catch one of us. After that, get a hold of this guy.
Sounds good. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you, Tony, for that. And if there's any churches that are, kind of grouped up together in the same community or kind of regional area that would be interested in trying something like a GSE cohort, reach out to Tony and talk to him more about that. Have some one-on-one conversations with him. If you'd like to talk with myself or even Brian about some of the GSE trainings that we're kind of working through and just kind of utilizing, reach out. Love to talk to you guys some more about that. Dinner is at 5 o'clock. Any other announcements, Brian? No. So you are dismissed? I don't know. Before we're dismissed, would there be a volunteer that would like to pray for the meal? I'm pretty sure it's been blessed already, but would somebody want to add a double blessing to that? Yeah? Myron?